A company that once powered 4% of an entire country's economy watched its stock collapse 98% in 12 years. Most companies in that position write their final chapter. Nokia wrote a completely different one. The rise. How a paper mill became the world's phone company. Nokia did not start in technology. It started in a forest. A paper mill in southern Finland in 1865, named after the river town where it was built. Over the following century, it absorbed a rubber company and a cable manufacturer and became a sprawling conglomerate, making everything from Wellington boots to telegraph wire. The mobile phone arrived as an afterthought. Nokia entered the business through a small joint venture in 1979. Their first device weighed close to 10 kilograms and was designed to be installed in cars. It was a product for wealthy executives, not ordinary people, and it represented only a fraction of what Nokia actually earned. Everything shifted in 1992 when Jorma Ollila took over as chief executive officer. He looked at Nokia's scattered business portfolio and made a decision that seemed borderline irrational. Strip everything back and keep only mobile phones. No rubber, no paper, no cables. Just the one business that most of the board wanted to sell. The timing was perfect, in a way Ollila could not have fully known. Digital cellular networks were expanding globally, and Nokia was positioned to lead them. Within a decade, they were not just a phone company, they were a national institution. By the turn of the millennium, Nokia represented 4% of Finland's entire GDP and controlled nearly 40% of the global mobile phone market, more than their three closest competitors combined. The Nokia 3310 sold over 100 million units. The brand became shorthand for reliability and accessibility. This was not just a successful company. It was one of the most dominant technology businesses in human history. The fall. What happens when the leader stops looking forward? Dominance creates a specific kind of blindness. When you control half the market and your products define the category, warnings feel like noise. That is the context for what happened in January 2007 when Apple introduced the iPhone, and Nokia's internal response was essentially, "We have seen this before, and it is not a serious threat." Their engineers physically dismantled the iPhone and cataloged its weaknesses. It cost too much to produce. It failed standard drop tests. It had no physical keyboard. These were real observations. The problem was that Nokia evaluated a product built around an entirely different philosophy, using the criteria of the old one. They measured the iPhone against what their customers had always valued, rather than asking what customers might value next. The number that felt like vindication in the short term was Nokia's 50% smartphone market share at the end of 2007, against Apple's 3%. What that number obscured was the direction of travel. Apple was building an ecosystem. Developers were arriving. Applications were multiplying. The iPhone was not competing on the same axis as Nokia's devices. It was creating a new one. Nokia's attempt to respond came in 2009 with a device marketed as the iPhone killer. It had better hardware specifications than the iPhone on almost every metric that existed at the time. What it did not have was software that worked. The operating system crashed. The touchscreen failed to respond consistently. The App Store launched with a fraction of the titles available on Apple's platform and never caught up. Nokia publicly acknowledged the failure within months of launch. It was a rare moment of corporate honesty, and it signaled that the problem was not fixable from the inside. The board brought in an outsider in 2010, the first non-Finnish chief executive officer in Nokia's history. He concluded that the software platform was unsalvageable and made the decision to abandon it entirely in favor of Microsoft Windows Phone operating system. The internal memo describing Nokia as standing on a burning platform became one of the most widely read business documents of the decade. It was intended to motivate. Instead, it leaked immediately and told the market, and Nokia's own customers, that the company's existing products were dead ends. Sales collapsed. The migration to Windows Phone produced devices that were well-reviewed but arrived into an app ecosystem that developers had already decided not to support. 2 years after the pivot, Nokia had less than 3% of the smartphone market. Their stock hit €1.33. The fall was complete. The pivot, selling the burning ship and buying the future. What happened next is one of the most counterintuitive corporate maneuvers in recent business history. Nokia's new chairman, Risto Siilasmaa, arrived in 2012 when the company was still actively losing value. Operating losses had reached €2.3 billion. The press was not asking whether Nokia would go bankrupt. They were calculating when. Siilasmaa later described the challenge as dismantling an aircraft in mid-flight and reassembling it into something completely different. The first step was the most painful and the most necessary. In 2013, Microsoft approached Nokia to acquire the phone division. Siilasmaa initially resisted, but eventually concluded that holding on to a collapsing business out of sentiment was not strategy. It was denial. Nokia sold its phone business to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. The critics called it the end of Nokia. 2 years later, Microsoft wrote off $7.6 billion on that same acquisition, more than the entire purchase price, and eliminated thousands of jobs. Nokia had sold the burning ship at market value while it still had value. The company walked away with the cash, its patents, and a division that most of the world had forgotten existed. That forgotten division was network infrastructure. Since 2007, Nokia had been running it as a joint venture with Siemens. Before the Microsoft deal even closed, Nokia bought out Siemens half for €1.7 billion. They now owned the entire business outright. The company that everyone thought of as a phone maker had quietly been building the physical networks that every phone on Earth depended on. The new chief executive officer, Rajeev Suri, took that foundation and accelerated it aggressively. Nokia had wireless infrastructure. What it lacked was the full portfolio: IP routing, fixed-line networks, optical transport, the pieces needed to sell complete end-to-end network solutions, rather than components. In 2015, Nokia announced the acquisition of Alcatel-Lucent for €15.6 billion. Alcatel-Lucent brought everything Nokia was missing. It also brought Bell Labs, one of the most storied research institutions in the history of technology, the birthplace of cellular networks, holding over 20,000 patents. With Bell Labs inside Nokia, the company had the research capability to lead the next generation of wireless technology rather than simply participate in it. The rebuild, 5G, Huawei, and the Western alternative. Bell Labs delivered almost immediately. Nokia unveiled a 5G chipset that tripled bandwidth while cutting power consumption by 64%. 30 operators signed to test it. The technology was real and competitive. Then the geopolitical landscape shifted in Nokia's favor. In 2019, the United States government banned Huawei from American networks. Huawei had dominated the global telecom infrastructure market for years by undercutting Western competitors on price. That advantage disappeared overnight. Britain followed, ordering carriers to remove all Huawei equipment from 5G networks by 2027. Across Europe and North America, carriers that had been locked into Huawei infrastructure needed alternative suppliers urgently. Nokia was one of the only credible Western options. They won contracts with BT Group in Britain. They signed deals with AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile in the United States. By late 2020, Nokia had accumulated 100 commercial 5G contracts. Suri had described the rebuilt company as the Western alternative to Huawei, and for a period, that positioning was commercially decisive. The NVIDIA bet. What comes after the smartphone? The 5G momentum did not hold. Verizon dropped Nokia for Samsung in a contract worth $6.6 billion. AT&T awarded Ericsson a $14 billion deal and announced plans to remove Nokia equipment. By early 2025, Nokia's mobile networks division had generated just €12 million in operating profit, down 89% in a single year. The window of opportunity had partially closed. But a different conversation had been developing quietly. Jensen Huang, chief executive officer of NVIDIA, understood that the next phase of AI would not live inside data centers. Autonomous vehicles, industrial robots, AR devices, any system that needs to make decisions in milliseconds cannot afford the latency of a round trip to a distant server. The processing needs to happen at the edge of the network, as close as possible to the point of action. That means the cell tower. NVIDIA had spent years trying to convince telecom companies to build networks on its hardware. Most vendors had architectures incompatible with the switch. Nokia was different. Their infrastructure design could accommodate NVIDIA chips without being rebuilt from the ground up. Of the major Western vendors, Nokia was the only one positioned to make the transition without starting over. At NVIDIA's GTC conference in Washington in October 2025, Jensen Huang announced a $1 billion investment in Nokia, making NVIDIA the company's second-largest shareholder. Nokia's chief executive officer described the partnership as putting an AI data center into everyone's pocket. T-Mobile signed on as the first customer, with trials beginning in 2026. Nokia's stock rose 22% in a single day, its largest single-day gain in over a decade. The AI radio access network market is projected to exceed $200 billion by 2030. Nokia lost the smartphone war. That fact does not change. But the company that started as a Finnish paper mill, became the world's dominant phone maker, collapsed almost entirely, sold its most famous business at the right moment, rebuilt itself around infrastructure, acquired Bell Labs, positioned itself as the Western alternative to Huawei, and then became the cornerstone of NVIDIA's trillion-dollar AI edge computing strategy. That company is not a failure. It is one of the most remarkable reinventions in the history of business. Drop a comment telling us whether you think the NVIDIA bet will define Nokia's next decade. Check the end screen for more business resurrection stories waiting.